My grandfather lived in New York, but occasionally visited Spain, where our extended family resided. My mother was his only child, raised in the United States. She wasn't particularly fond of her family's homeland, but decided to visit one summer after completing her education. During her stay, she lodged with an old family friend who owned a large estate in the countryside. It was there she met Lucas, the nephew of the estate owner. Lucas was charming and kind, and my mother quickly grew fond of him. She called her parents and expressed her feelings for him. Without delay, they flew to Spain, and soon her engagement to Lucas was finalized. My mother was an independent and pragmatic woman, so there were no objections to her choice. Their marriage started beautifully, but it didn't take long for cracks to appear. Lucas had a dark side. He was a heavy drinker and had a history of infidelity. My mother tried to hold the marriage together, but his constant betrayal and erratic behavior proved too much. By the time my brother Daniel was born, the tension in the house had escalated. Lucas often indulged Daniel, letting him do as he pleased, while my mother tried to teach him discipline. Naturally, Daniel began to see my mother as the obstacle to his happiness and favored Lucas instead. Around this time, my grandfather became gravely ill. He decided to transfer his entire business and assets to my mother so she could manage them from the US. Shortly after, he passed away. This decision sparked even more arguments between my parents. Lucas wanted control of the finances, but my mother feared he would waste them on his vices, leaving nothing for their children. Not long after I was born, when I was 6 months old, my mother decided she'd had enough. She divorced Lucas and took control of the business. My brother stayed with my father while I went with my mother. My childhood was lonely. My mother was consumed by work, so I was raised by a nanny. My mother rarely had time for me. Later, I was sent to a prestigious boarding school in London, as was common in our social circle. The goal was to prepare us for elite society and ensure fluency in English and European etiquette. Our family moved in high circles, surrounded by politicians, business moguls, and prominent figures. At social gatherings, I would occasionally see my father and brother, but we barely acknowledged each other. By the time I was ready for college, my mother had ventured into politics, running against a powerful rival named Victor, a wealthy businessman and landowner. He had a long-standing rivalry with my father, and now that animosity extended to my mother. While attending a friend's wedding, I noticed a man who stood apart from the crowd. Unlike others, who were either drinking or mingling with dates, he spent most of his time speaking with an elderly woman. His quiet confidence intrigued me. Later, I learned his name was Andrew, and he was Victor's son. Despite knowing our family's history, I couldn't help but be drawn to him. Andrew and I started talking at university, and soon we were inseparable. For the first time, I felt truly happy. When my mother found out, she was livid. She warned me that Andrew's family could use me to undermine her politically, but I assured her that our relationship was genuine. Reluctantly, she met with Andrew's parents. However, whatever was discussed during that meeting caused Andrew to leave for London abruptly. He stopped answering my calls and cut all ties with me. Heartbroken, I dropped out of university and withdrew from the world. Over time, I began to rebuild my life. I eventually married a man named Ethan, a successful lawyer my mother approved of. We built a stable life together, but a few years into our marriage, Andrew reappeared. To my shock, he and Ethan were close friends. Despite my discomfort, Andrew became a frequent visitor to our home. I did my best to keep my distance. But one evening during a party, Ethan overheard a private conversation between Andrew and me. Though nothing inappropriate was said, Ethan grew suspicious. He confronted me, and while I tried to reassure him, the trust between us was shattered. Ethan didn't leave me, but he became emotionally distant. A few years later, he married someone else, leaving me to raise our child alone. I don't blame Ethan. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But I do resent Andrew. If only he had stayed away, perhaps my life would have turned out differently. Life, I've learned, is often shaped by the choices we make, and the ones made for us. Tell me your opinion about this story, and remember to share this.